washed out in the rain, big manure pit, but also fertilizer being applied to the soil, going into our wells, into our underground water, running down into our river, and before the Deep Water Horizon well tragedy, the main problem in the Gulf of Mexico was the dead zone. So our waters are really really severely impacted by this. And when you have a young baby like I do, suddenly you become very aware of these things. In New York State, we still have good water. That could change with fracking. And maybe you have good water here still, but there's more and more threats to our water. And I know right up the stream here, you have a nuclear waste station, right? And that you are finding traces in the river right here. So it's, like I said, it's affecting really everyone. So I'm scared, guilty, and early confused. And it seems like when you think about it, most of the time there is this idea that there is a trade-off. But in the trade-off, you think that we're like a lose-lose situation, right? You lose your lifestyle, or you lose, your health. I mean, there's just it seems like a loss everywhere, and I don't, it's not quite a trade-off that I'm comfortable with. And solutions all too often seem to be another dose of the same medicine. We have blind faith in science and technology, or the market to find solutions for the problem that we're facing. For instance, instead of changing the factory farm system, we've made it a common practice to feed animals daily doses of antibiotics, as you all know, to protect them from the diseases that they get there. Not quite the solution that I would like. Can you go to the next slide? We're genetically engineering hens to take their mothering instinct instead of getting it out of, the crowded cages. And instead of addressing the causes of global warming, we're creating drought-resistant crops through genetic engineering that will survive global warming. Again, not quite the solution that I'm interested in. So, I like to put Einstein in my talks. Makes me sound cultured. You cannot solve a problem with the same mind that created it. But that's a pretty commonsensical quote. We can't just find meaningful solution if we basically just, going on with business as usual, with the same mindset. This dualistic, nature is separate from us, and as long as we find better and more efficient way of exploiting nature, then we'll be okay. So I want to take you to Joel's farm to show you, one second, to show you what I meant by sustainable agriculture being not only another solution to a problem, but it's really a radical different way at looking at the world. And it's this new paradigm is not only, again, a way to farm better or to bring food to our table in a more sustainable way. I think it's really a different way, a radical different way to look at ourselves and to understand our relationship with each other and with the world. But you remember this clip, Joel Salatin, it's early morning, he's in his farm, he looks at the sun rising, and then he goes and he opens the door in his kind of rickety chicken house, you know what I'm talking about, and on wheels, and then this chicken come out and he's like, "Good morning, ladies." And I don't know about you, but every time I meet Joel or I go on his farm, I feel like I feel open-hearted. It makes me happy because he's so happy. And I think that all of you, I'm sure, have met people in your lives that you feel have really taken their place, and there's something incredibly shining that come through from people that have taken their place. And I think that this is somehow the quality that in meeting Joel Salatin, Will Allen, and so many wonderful people in my life that have inspired me, this is a quality that I became really interested in. Like what happens, why are they so happy? How does that happen? I'm going to talk a little bit about Joel's farming. And I feel like most of you probably know a lot about that already, but just indulge me for a little bit. I'll just tell you why I think it's so fascinating. So you remember in the movie, Joel says that what he does is he wants to respect the chickenness of the chicken, the cowness of the cow. He wants to respect the essence of the animal. And he says that when he does this, everything falls into place. And so my question was, well, what falls into place, for him? Next, please. Well, actually, that's fine. So you saw an image of a cows eating grass. So Joel in his farm mimics nature. So he looks at what do herbivores do in nature? Well, obviously they eat grass. They don't eat dead animal. They don't eat corn and other byproduct of our industrial food system. So he leaves them on grass. That's kind of the obvious thing. But he also moves them every day from pasture to pasture. And again, in the wild, he observed that herbivores keep moving. They never stay long in one place. It's pretty obvious they move away from their own manure into fresh grass. It's also a way to protect themselves from predator. So he does the same. He moves them on a regular basis from paddock to paddock. Next. He also observed that in nature, birds follow herbivores. And so he follows his cows with chicken. And, again, like if you see that image of the chicken coming out into a new pasture with it's full of the cow manure from, the earlier days, they come out and they kind of rush to the manure. And then they do their little, chicken dance, like they do the break dance on the manure, because they're breaking apart the manure so that they can find the fly larvae. And obviously, the breaking apart of the manure is very good because when it's so concentrated, it's going to, kill the grass. But if you spread it, it's a great fertilizer. And it's also great. And Joel waits exactly 3 days. And it, might not be 3 days in this part of the country, but where he is, 3 days is where the larva is as fat and juicy as you can have it, but before it comes out, before it hatches. And so these chicken get, all of this protein and goodness. And his fields are sanitized. Let's see. Next slide, please. So both of the cows and the chickens are allowed to do, what they naturally want to do. And, the consequences are that, the fields are sanitized. He doesn't have fly problem and other problems. They're fertilized. He grows an incredible amount of food because of that. The meat and the eggs is full of beneficial fatty acid. I'm sure all of you know that grass-fed beef contains really beneficial omega-3s and CLAs, and that when you finish beef on grain, all of that is washed out. Let's go to the next one. So, but what's also fascinating is that it's not only just making better meat, it's also building soil. So intensive management intensifies the growth of grass and builds soil. What you want to do basically, and again, I feel like silly telling you guys that because I know there's some farmers in the room or people that are much closer to farmers than I am. But when you allow cows to eat the grass all the way to the bottom, basically what you're doing is that once they leave the field, in order for the grass to grow again, it's going to have to use what's in its roots, in the bank, right? It's going to have to use the saving of energy that they put in the roots in order to start growing. But if you keep it, if you don't allow them to go beyond a certain point, when the cows move to the next field, the grass is going to be able to grow simply through photosynthesis. It's not going to have to dip into its energy bank. And so what you do is that you keep building soil because, every time you cut down grass, the roots also shed. When the roots shed, it gets turned into soil through bacteria. So this process builds an incredible amount of soil. Let's see. When Joel's father first moved to the farm, the soil was eroded and depleted. He explains that in the movie. The first soil sample that he took in the early 60s, the soil averaged a little over 1% of organic matter, 1%. The last ones that he took in 2005, it averaged 8% of organic matter. Now, that's not just good in terms of productivity. As I mentioned, he's much more productive. He's able to have a new rotation every 6 weeks or so. That means, it can be hay, or it can be another animal. So it's a really, really productive soil. But it also means that he's retaining water. Do you want to go to the next slide? Here's the grass, another one. Production, lots of very productive. Yes, okay. So this is again in July, probably 2006. This is Joel's land, and this is his neighbor. And it's hard to tell in this slide because it's dark, but Joel's land is green. And we were dealing, it was a pretty intense drought in Virginia when I was there that summer. And so the neighbor's field all over, I mean, it was like Joel's farm was like a little oasis of green, and everything around him was basically dead. And when you ask his neighbor, they'll tell you with a straight face, oh, you know, it rains more on Joel's farm. Seriously, like they believe that. But what happens is that it obviously doesn't rain more on, there's no some, you know, he doesn't have some relationship with the god of rain and makes it rain more right on top of his land. But he retains an incredible amount of water. And it's not just good for him, but you know, when we're dealing with a dramatic climate change, we need to build resilience into the land. And this is one obvious way to build resilience, probably better than the genetically modified rice that we looked at earlier that should be able to grow in this field. You know, why not build your soil and retain water since we know how to do that? Now, I think that the most fascinating thing in terms of like what falls into place, so what falls into place, better quality meat, more productive land, sanitized fields, happy animals. Now also we see that you retain more water. What I thought was the most mind-boggling thing, because I had never imagined this, and maybe all of you, again, this is old news, but Joel sequesters carbon. So, you know, when I was telling that he's building soil, part of the building, part of photosynthesis, is that you turn carbon from CO2 into carbon that stays into the soil. Can you go to the next slide? Carbon sink is a part of the carbon cycle that has the ability to store carbon for long periods of time. So the soil, which I think, again, I had no idea, soil is the largest terrestrial sink or storage place for carbon. It's not only the largest terrestrial sink, more than the ocean, more than rainforest. Rainforests have very narrow soil. All of the carbon that's stored in rainforest is actually in the trees themselves. Soil is also the largest carbon sink over which we have control. We always talk about forests and how we need to build more forests, or we need to obviously stop the destruction of the rainforest and other forests and protect them. You know, absolutely true. But it takes so much, I mean, it's hard to protect rainforests, and it takes time to grow a forest. We have an incredible control over our farmland. We can overnight change our farmland and build soil like Joel did from 1% to 8% carbon. Huge increase. Would you go to the next slide? So this is from the Rodale Institute that has been comparing for 27 years different mode of farming, and pretty traditional organic from, you know, industrial. And they came out with these statistics. It's not only that we can capture carbon, but we can stop emitting carbon. The food industry, the food system is one of the great polluter. It guzzles oil really fast. Apparently, U.S. agriculture emits a total of 1.5 trillion pounds of CO2 annually. Big numbers don't do anything for me, but I still quote them. Converting to organic agriculture would give us a net increase in soil carbon of 736 billion pounds. Again, means nothing to me. But what means something to me is that if you converted just the corn production from conventional to organic. Now, we're not talking about radically changing our system. We're just talking about moving to organic. You would not only